So I'm Joylette Hudson, and yes, like Shay has says, I'm a therapist. I've been a qualified therapist since 2018, and my main modality or my main way of doing therapy is person-centered counselling. So what that basically means is that I don't present as the expert in the room, but I actually draw alongside my clients, and I believe my clients are the best expert of themselves. And I think that's particularly um, real and a very strong point for people who are neurodivergent, because a lot of the times you don't feel like you have any control, and a lot of the times it feels like everybody's the expert telling you what's wrong with you or what's right with you and how you should be doing things, and you get lots of labels. And so I think person-centered counselling actually offers a nice safe space for people who find themselves neurodiverse to be in a place that is safe. So person-centered counselling is all about providing a safe space where people can feel safe enough to be vulnerable and be their true self. So that's what I do. I'm not a neurodivergent specialist. I have worked with clients who have struggled with things like autism or ADHD in particular, or struggled with OCD, struggled with feeling like I just don't know who I am. I'm kind of feeling out of sorts. I don't know whether I'm coming or going. I feel misunderstood and so forth. So you get this sense of feeling isolated. So I have had some experience, and Shay asked me to come along today to be part of this community to share some of my thoughts on how people who find themselves not neurotypical but neurodiverse, and how to navigate that, and some tips. Is that right, Shay? Is that the kind of thing you're looking for? Okay, so I put a couple of slides together just to give us a framework to work from, and I hope you find it useful. So I'm just going to open up my slide here. Okay, so um, I'm not coming as an expert. And I think that's the really key thing that I need to say today. I think it would be dishonoring and insulting to people who are coming from a way of living where their brain doesn't function in a neurotypical way. So neurotypical means a way that everybody says is normal. You know, we have this phrase that I don't feel normal, or I don't things not do things normal. I don't believe there is any normal. There's either neurotypical or neurodivergent for me at the moment. I think most of us actually fit somewhere on that spectrum, to be honest. I myself, I am not assessed as neurodivergent, but I do actually think, and I have a narrative that actually that I have a neurodivergent brain. I really do believe I have. And when I look back on my own life and my own upbringing, I can see lots of traits that are very typical of neurodivergent people. I can see lots of traits that were evident in my own life. So one of the things that I was always told by my parents, especially my mother, was that I was very quiet. And there's nothing wrong with being quiet, but being quiet for me was a safe place. It was because I didn't really understand the world around me. I always felt like I didn't understand what people were really saying. I couldn't really comprehend their conversations. And so it was easier to be quiet. And as we go on today, we will know that that's kind of masking. You know, a lot of us do mask. And so I'm not coming as an expert. I'm coming into this forum to share and to listen. Okay. So, um, hmm. It looks like okay. So I thought it would be sensible to start with what is neurodivergence, actually. And it refers to variations in the human brain. And most of you will know this because you've probably done the research yourself, or you might have been formally assessed. It is regarding sociability. It's about learning, it's about attention, it's about moods and other mental functions, and it covers a range of conditions, and the ones that we are most familiar with is autism and ADHD. um, and so today we're just kind of focusing just broadly. We're not going to focus on anything in specific. Okay. If we were to give a definition, it is characterized by neurological differences that are innate and often misunderstood. And that's the key thing. It's about the misunderstanding. There have been so many times I've been working with clients, especially young people, who have felt so misunderstood. Misunderstood by parents, misunderstood by siblings, misunderstood by school, misunderstood by friends. And so they find themselves in a situation where they feel very isolated and overwhelmed. And that's what I deal with in the counselling room a lot, is people feeling so overwhelmed because they are so misunderstood. So an example might be um, someone not wanting to talk. Sometimes we can be elective mutes in social settings, and that's where we decide not to talk. And I was like that growing up. I was like that at school. I was like that at college. I was like that in social contexts where I would actually just go silent because it was just safer to go silent. So there's this thing of being misunderstood, and it is important to recognize that being neurodivergent is not a deficit. And I really want you guys in this forum to understand that it's not a deficit. It's not about being abnormal. And that is something my clients come with. They say, I feel like something is lacking. I feel so abnormal. I feel different. I don't feel normal. But rather, it's a different way of experiencing the world. And that again is what I invite my clients to come into a space of understanding that their brain functions differently. It doesn't mean that they have a deficit. Okay, so that's one of the things that I use as my foundation when working with clients. So when working with clients, I think it goes beyond just talking. So counseling is talking therapy. It is talking therapy. And I think in the first instance, with all talking therapy, it's about creating a safe and trusted space. And it's creating that space where you can feel comfortable to just unveil, to take the mask off. And that doesn't happen automatically, and it doesn't happen straight away. And with people whose narrative that is that they are neurodivergent, or maybe they have been assessed that way, it's actually thinking about doing it creatively. So when Shay asked me about this to give some tips, I was thinking to myself, okay, I could come up with a lot of tips that you maybe do this, try this, do that, but I actually don't think that is helpful. I think it's helpful to come from a point of view of a frame of reference. So my frame of reference when working with anybody, whether you're neurotypical or neurodivergent, is to make sure the space is safe. So I've got up here using other ways of verbalizing other than talking, because sometimes people will say to me, Joylette, I don't know how I feel. I don't have the words to explain what's going on. And so sometimes what I like to do is use a bit of creativity. So creativity can look like any of the things I've put on this slide. It can be from a simple mind map. People find mind mapping really helpful. And I would just invite you to try that. When you feel like everything's just scrambled in your head, that's one of the things that I hear, is everything is just up here. It's just in my head and I don't know how to articulate it. I say to people, why not just get a bit of paper and a pen and just do a mind map, just brainstorm, just dump it, what is on there? Because when you can see what is on the paper, it kind of releases the burden a little bit, because you think to yourself, actually, it makes sense why I feel the way that I do, because there's 101 things that's going through my head. And that's not specific to neurodivergent people. That is everybody. But for neurodivergent people, it's probably more helpful to get things out of your head. So I use other ways of verbalizing other than talking. So I use things like sand tray. Sometimes I have the sand tray out with my clients, and I have toys, and they can talk through the toys. They can move the toys around. They can describe in the sand tray what's actually going on the inside. I have things like feeling wheels. A feeling wheel is a tool where it's got lots of words that home in on a specific type of feeling. I also use things like diagrams. I think diagrams and worksheets work really well with people who are neurodivergent. Diagrams which are color coded, that show you actually this is where you find yourself. One of the diagrams I like to use is called the window of tolerance. And if we have time before we get to the end of of this session, I will show that. But window of tolerance shows us that all of us live within a window of tolerance. It's a place where we feel safe and calm. We feel collected. We feel connected with ourselves, and we feel connected with. But there will be things that draw us outside of our window of tolerance. It could be like what I described earlier. It could be like being in a social setting where you feel like I can't articulate myself. I don't understand what people are saying. I feel overwhelmed. I've got sensory overload. And so you start to get pulled out of your window of tolerance. And what you will notice that is that you will start to represent behaviors which either go into hyper-aroused state or hyper-aroused. Hyper-aroused state is when you're totally overwhelmed. This is where you become anxious, and this is where you become, you might have explodes of emotions because you're just outside of your window of tolerance. Or you might go into hyper-aroused state. This is where you shut down. And this is something that clients I work with experience a lot. They just shut down. They just stop talking. They disassociate from their feelings and their emotions because it's just too hard to kind of balance what is going on the inside with what's going on around them socially. So I like to use diagrams because if people can see it, it kind of makes it all make a little bit more sense. Okay. Um, so I use, you can use things like art, you can use things like music. We talked about drawing and brainstorming, which is mind mapping, the sand tray, and also cards. You can get really useful cards to use, which explain an emotion, has a bit of a narrative around it. And in the room, I can talk to my clients around those cards. Okay. Another thing that I like to do with clients is exploring what things look like for you, for me, because sometimes we say things. So say like for instance, someone says, I just feel so overwhelmed. I don't know whether I'm coming or going. I like to pull that apart a little bit. What does that look like? Okay. For some people, it might look like it feels like the whole room is caving in on me when I feel overwhelmed. It might look like I'm a very small person in a place where there's very large people. Everyone is larger than life because they can articulate themselves. They've got charisma. They know how to explain themselves. I all of a sudden I shrink in size. I think it's really useful to start having a mindset that the way that my brain is functioning is actually normal. It's not unusual. And so that automatically pulls you out of a place of feeling isolated. So I like to explore what things look like and explore what would make things helpful. So if any of you are thinking about going into therapy, you're looking for a therapist, I would say one of the things that is very useful to have in the back of your mind is thinking about what do things look like for me and what would I find useful in the counselling room. So I'll give you an example. I was working with a client who considered herself neurodivergent. She couldn't get an assessment. She found it really frustrating that she couldn't get an assessment, and she was really stuck in life because nobody was listening to her. Doctors weren't listening to her. Her parents were frustrated and just felt that she was attention seeking and a drama queen, and she was all over the place. And so one of the things I used to do with her is, first of all, establish if you believe that you have a neurodivergent, diverse brain, well, let's work from that premise. Why do you need an assessment to tell you what you already know? Why not work with what you know? So if you think that your brain functions in that way, work with it. If you know that your brain needs things chunked down in bite sizes, then work with that. There's no shame with that. If you need things broken down, I need things broken down. I would just say, sorry, can you just explain that again? Can you break it down for me in bite sizes? Because it will help you to understand. With that particular client, she had a lot of trauma in her life and she wasn't able to articulate the trauma. So what we used to do is we used to use pen and paper a lot, and she found that really useful. We used to use color pens, and sometimes when she couldn't articulate it, I would just ask her, could you just write it down on the paper? Let's do some lists. Let's write it down. Let's do some arrows and understand to see what is going on. Let's draw some pictures. Sometimes we use the sand tray. She also had OCD and she wouldn't touch anything. So when we used the sand tray, I used to have to touch the toys. I would ask her where she wanted me to place things. And through it, she was able to articulate. She felt seen and she felt heard. And what I think a lot of the times is this thing about not being seen and not being heard. Okay. Um, just very quickly, some of these things you might be all too familiar with. You might not have been able to put it into words, and it most definitely has probably been misunderstood. So masking is all about trying to fit in. So you might be struggling, the world is not making sense, you don't know how you fit in the world. And so what we try to do is appear like everybody else. But all that does is cause a lot of stress. We'll all have our different ways of masking. My masking was to go quiet. I would just go really quiet. You may have other ways of masking. Masking might look like anger. People might be so angry and just aggressive, but it's not because they're aggressive by nature. It's just that they're so confused, and they're masking what they see as deficiencies. Okay, so just sit with yourself and just be curious. I like to use the word curious. Just be curious. Don't go on a witch hunt. Don't look for it. Just be curious. Well, what ways do I mask? How do I do that? The other thing is rejection sensitivity, which you all might be very familiar with. This is where you feel that people might be rejecting you. You're reading, you're interpreting things. So an example might be, I might be in a session with a client, and obviously my time is my sessions are time bound. I have other clients that are coming in, and every so often I need to check the clock to make sure that the work that I'm doing with my clients is being kept safe. I am emotionally holding them, and there's no point diving into some deep stuff when I've only got 5 minutes of the session to go. That's not going to leave my client in a safe space. I need to make sure when my clients leave my counseling room, they are held and they're kept in a safe space. So if we're dealing with trauma, and we're stripping away the layers of some very painful information, I need to look at the clock. I need to see that, okay, I've got 20 minutes of my session time left. I need to start bringing my client out of this space and bring them back to a place where they are stabilized. I need to look at the clock. But to someone who's neurodivergent, they might be sensitive to rejection, and seeing me look at the clock might give them a message that they're over talking. It might give them a message that says, I'm actually bored with what they're saying, I'm fed up, because they may have experienced people rolling their eyes, huffing and puffing, looking at the clock, and all of a sudden they're really shut down, because rejection is really painful, and they're so acutely aware of rejection. And so what I would just invite you to kind of be curious about is being aware of how rejection sensitivity shows itself in your life. That's one of the ways you can look after yourself. If you're aware, I really believe self-awareness is such a powerful tool. When things come into our awareness, it's not to demoralize you. When someone points something out to you that is in your blind spot that you're not aware of, it's actually an invitation for you to grow. If you can see, when people point things out to you, rather than get into a place of defense and thinking you have to fight your corner and defend yourself, actually sit with it. It's an uncomfortable space. We have to learn how to sit with the uncomfortable, but sit with that uncomfortable space and think, okay, this is brought to my awareness for a reason. I can do one or two things with it. I can get defensive and dig my heels in, and it becomes unhelpful to me and everybody around me. Or I can use this as an invitation for growth. What am I feeling sensitive about? That person looked at the clock. Was it really that they're fed up with me, or is it just that they're on the time? At the moment, I'm on the clock at the moment. I need to leave at 11:30. So I'll be looking at my clock every so often because I need to go and get a bus to get down into Brixton. So just be curious. I like to invite clients to be curious rather than self-condemning, rather than holding yourself up to expectations that are unrealistic. There's nothing wrong with expectations, but there is something wrong if they're not realistic. Okay. So just hold that in your mind. And then the other thing is fawning or people pleasing. You might find that you're doing behaviors that people please because you want to be accepted. You might have lived a life where you felt different and not accepted, or just kind of like isolated or pushed to the side or pushed to the back. So fawning and people pleasing is about needing to make others happy so you can stay safe. Again, be curious with it. Why am I not talking about how I really feel? Why am I not able to say what is really bothering me? Why am I trying to protect that person's feeling at the expense of mine? It all comes down to perhaps a feeling of wanting to be safe. So be curious. Use curiosity to discover what's going on for you, why you do the things that you do, and why. Where neurodiversity affects the Black community specifically, as people of color, whether it's you're Asian or you're from Africa or the West Indies, you're not only trying to fit in a atypical society, you're also trying to fit in your cultural setting. And a lot of the times in our cultural setting, neurodiversity is actually not understood, especially by the older generation. So I grew up, and when I look around at my siblings and cousins, I can see neurodiversity all around. But growing up in my culture is from the West Indies. My parents are from the Caribbean. If you were quiet, you were scolded for it. What's the matter with you? Open up your mouth. You're too sensitive. If you you like just reading because that was your safe space, you were told that your head's always in a book. Go and do something else. It was frowned upon. It was misunderstood. I grew up hearing words like "you're too slight" or "you're dunce." I grew up hearing words like that, not so much directed at me, but I saw where it was directed at others who, looking back now as a therapist with informed lenses, I look back and I can see that some of my cousins, some of my siblings were actually neurodiverse. You're told you're lazy. You know, when you procrastinate, procrastination is a big trait. People tell you you're lazy. You're told you're lazy when you feel burnt out because you're overwhelmed. You're working so hard. Your brain is working so hard to fit in because of the masking. You feel misunderstood because there's a fear of intolerance. My daughter was typical for this. My eldest daughter, she did an assessment, not by the GP. I have access to assessments, and I did an assessment on her, which came out that she was ADHD. And one of the things with her growing up, her room was always messy, but she never knew how to tidy it up because she felt so overwhelmed by the mess. But I would get on her case. I'd be like, tidy up your room. What's the matter with you? Until one day I just stopped and I asked her, what does she need? And she just burst into tears and she said, Mom, I don't know where to start to tidy up my room. Can you help me? And now as an adult, as she's growing up, she will tell me that when her brain feels overwhelmed, she knows when her brain feels overwhelmed because her room's messy. But when she feels like she's getting into a more stable space, she starts tidying up her room and she feels a little bit more organized. That's something that is typical of being neurodiverse. So sometimes, you know, in our Black communities, we're afraid of intolerance because people just don't understand, and feeling socially awkward and standing out. I used to like to be in my own company because it felt comfortable and safe. I was always told I was too selfish with myself because I found it socially hard to integrate with others because people didn't understand it. And then the last thing I just wanted to talk about is just stimming. You know, stimming is those repetitive behaviours that we do. For those in the Black community, it's probably not so easily accepted as it is within the white community. It's quite normal for people on the spectrum to do repetitive behaviours. For me, I never knew until I understood stimming a little bit that I do it a lot. When I'm trying to take in information, I do something. I rock. I just rock like this all the time, and it feels really soothing, and it helps me to calm everything down, and I can decipher information, and I don't realize I'm doing it. But people say to me, "Oh, you're rocking. What's the matter? You're rocking." But it's in the white community, it's just normal. But sometimes in our Black community, you tell keep still. What's the matter with you? Keep still. You know, my daughter will pick her lip. She would just go like this. She'll do it over and over and over again. And sometimes she'll be like, stop that, you know, that's not how you behave, kind of thing. So yeah, that's just a little bit, some tips there, some enlightenment actually to help you as you navigate life. And we're out of time.